The Devil Wears Prada 2 is the long-awaited sequel to the 2006 fashion comedy drama The Devil Wears Prada. The story brings audiences back into the glamorous but ruthless world of fashion, returning to the complicated relationship between Miranda Priestly and Andy Sachs. The sequel is directed by David Frankel, who also directed the original film, and features the return of Meryl Streep and Hathaway, Emily Blunt, and Stanley Tucci. The screenplay is written by Aline Brosh McKenna, who also wrote the first movie. The sequel is scheduled for release in 2026. The first film ended with Andy walking away from Runway magazine after realizing that becoming successful in Miranda's world was changing the person she wanted to be. Almost 2 decades later, the sequel explores how much both women have changed. Andy is no longer the inexperienced young journalist who struggled to understand fashion. Miranda is still an enormously influential figure, but the fashion industry around her has transformed. The sequel, therefore, isn't simply about Andy returning to Runway. It is about 2 women from different generations discovering that the rules of power have changed. The story begins with Andy in a very different position from where audiences saw her in the first film. She has developed an impressive career in journalism and has become much more confident professionally. She understands how the media works, how powerful people operate, and how much sacrifice is required to succeed. However, Andy's success has not necessarily made her completely satisfied. She has grown older, and her priorities have changed. The younger Andy wanted to prove that she belonged in the world of journalism. The older Andy is more interested in deciding what kind of journalist and what kind of person she wants to be. Miranda, meanwhile, remains one of the most recognizable and feared figures in fashion. But the fashion business has changed dramatically since the first film. Traditional magazines no longer possess the same unquestioned authority they once had. Digital media, social platforms, influencers, online publications, and changing consumer habits have transformed the industry. Miranda is therefore facing a challenge that is very different from anything she encountered in the original story. Her problem is not simply finding the next great designer or choosing the next cover model. It is about maintaining power in an industry where power itself is becoming increasingly fragmented. The sequel uses this changing fashion landscape as the foundation for its main conflict. Miranda is attempting to protect her position and preserve the influence of the fashion establishment, while Andy represents a generation of media professionals who understand that journalism and influence can exist outside traditional institutions. Interestingly, Andy and Miranda are no longer simply employer and employee. Their relationship has evolved into something much more complicated. There is still tension between them, but there is also a level of professional respect that did not exist in the same form during the first film. Andy knows exactly how formidable Miranda is. Miranda, in turn, understands that Andy is no longer the inexperienced assistant she once dismissed. This creates one of the sequel's most interesting dynamics. A major part of the plot revolves around the changing fortunes of Miranda's fashion empire and the professional decisions Andy must make as she becomes involved in that world again. Miranda's position is threatened by new corporate realities and a fashion industry that is increasingly controlled by commercial interests, digital platforms, and younger voices. She needs allies. Andy is potentially one of them, but Andy has no desire to become Miranda's assistant again. That distinction is crucial. The sequel does not simply repeat the first movie's premise by putting Andy back under Miranda's authority. Instead, the 2 women find themselves on more equal professional ground. Andy can challenge Miranda in ways she could not when she was 20-something. The return of Emily Charlton adds another important dimension to the story. Emily is no longer the ambitious assistant desperately trying to survive Runway. She has established herself as a powerful figure in the fashion world and has developed her own career and authority. Emily's transformation is one of the clearest examples of how much time has passed. In the original film, Emily was obsessed with the fashion industry and terrified of disappointing Miranda. Now she understands the business from the inside. She has learned how to use the knowledge she gained from Runway to build her own professional identity. Her relationship with Andy has also matured. The 2 women were not exactly friends when they worked together, although there was an underlying understanding between them. Years later, their relationship has more warmth and mutual respect. Emily is also able to see Miranda from a different perspective. She understands Miranda's strengths, but she is no longer intimidated by her in the same way. Stanley Tucci's Nigel returns as another crucial part of the story. Nigel remains one of the most sympathetic and intelligent figures in the fashion world. His understanding of designers, clothing, and the business side of fashion makes him one of Miranda's most valuable allies. His relationship with Miranda remains complicated because he knows her better than most people. Nigel understands that Miranda's intimidating personality is partly a defense mechanism. At the same time, he knows that she can make ruthless decisions when her position is threatened. The sequel therefore gives returning characters a chance to demonstrate how they have evolved rather than simply recreating their personalities from 2006. Andy is more confident, Emily is more powerful, Nigel is more experienced, and Miranda is forced to confront a world in which her traditional authority is no longer enough. Another important element of the story is Andy's personal life. In the first movie, Andy's relationship with Nate was an important part of the story because her increasingly demanding job began interfering with her personal life. The sequel takes place many years later, so Andy is dealing with entirely different adult concerns. She has relationships, responsibilities, and professional ambitions that cannot be separated as easily as they were when she was younger. This helps create a more mature story. The original movie was largely about a young woman discovering what she didn't want to become. The sequel is more about an experienced woman deciding what she is willing to compromise in order to continue succeeding. That is a much more complicated question. Andy now understands that every career requires compromises. The problem is determining which compromises are acceptable. The fashion industry becomes a metaphor for that dilemma. Fashion is glamorous from the outside, but behind the scenes it is driven by money, competition, marketing, and power. Miranda has survived because she understands those realities better than almost anyone. Andy, however, believes journalism should still have some independence from those forces. This philosophical disagreement creates tension between them. Miranda sees the world as it actually is. Andy wants to believe it can still be better. Neither woman is completely right or completely wrong. That ambiguity gives the sequel more emotional depth. The story also explores how technology has transformed the fashion industry. When the original film was released, fashion magazines still had enormous cultural influence. In the sequel, that influence has been redistributed. A designer can become famous through social media. A celebrity can influence fashion without appearing on a magazine cover. A digital publication can reach millions of readers without having the traditional prestige of a print magazine. Miranda understands this transformation, but she does not necessarily like it. Her authority was built on a world where editors controlled access. Now everyone has access. The result is a battle between old-school editorial power and a new economy of influence. This conflict also creates some of the film's humor. Miranda is forced to navigate technologies and communication styles that are very different from the environment she dominated in the first movie. Her reactions to younger fashion professionals and digital culture provide opportunities for the sharp humor associated with the franchise. However, the sequel does not portray Miranda as an old-fashioned character who simply cannot understand modernity. That would be too easy. Instead, Miranda is intelligent enough to recognize that the rules have changed. Her challenge is figuring out how to survive without surrendering the identity that made her powerful. This becomes one of the emotional centers of the film. Miranda has spent her entire adult life building an empire based on taste, authority, and perfection. Now she is confronted with a world that values speed, accessibility, and online engagement. She has to decide whether adapting means losing herself. Andy faces a similar question from the opposite direction. She has spent years becoming successful. Now she must decide whether success still means what it once did. Their parallel journeys are what make the sequel more than a simple reunion. At a certain point, Andy becomes increasingly involved in Miranda's professional crisis. She begins investigating the forces threatening Miranda's position and discovers that the situation is more complicated than she initially expected. The people challenging Miranda are not necessarily villains. They represent a new economic reality. This is important because the movie avoids making the conflict simply Miranda versus evil executives. Instead, the real conflict is between different models of power. Miranda believes in editorial authority. The new generation believes in digital influence. Andy stands somewhere between them. She understands traditional journalism, but also understands the new media environment. This makes her valuable. It also puts her in a difficult position. Helping Miranda could potentially damage Andy's own professional principles. Refusing to help could contribute to the destruction of a legacy she has come to understand and, perhaps reluctantly, respect. Emily also becomes important during this period. Her experience in the fashion world gives her an alternative perspective. Unlike Andy, Emily is deeply comfortable with the industry. Unlike Miranda, she is willing to embrace new methods. She represents a bridge between the old and new fashion worlds. Her role, therefore, becomes more significant than simply providing comic moments. She demonstrates that adaptation does not necessarily mean abandoning tradition. It can mean taking the best parts of the old system and combining them with new ideas. Nigel similarly represents continuity. He understands the craftsmanship and creativity behind fashion while recognizing that the business has changed. Through these characters, the film explores the idea that fashion itself is constantly reinventing itself. Clothing changes, trends change, editors change, technology changes, but the desire for beauty, creativity, and self-expression remains. The emotional climax of the story eventually brings Andy and Miranda into a direct confrontation over their professional philosophies. Andy realizes that Miranda has sacrificed enormous parts of her personal life to become successful. She also realizes that Miranda's choices cannot simply be judged by someone who has never lived them. At the same time, Miranda recognizes that Andy has achieved something she herself struggled to achieve: professional success without completely surrendering her personal identity. This creates a subtle reversal of their original relationship. In the first film, Miranda was the person Andy wanted to impress. In the sequel, Miranda becomes someone Andy can finally challenge. But Andy also realizes that she has learned many of her strongest professional instincts from Miranda. That realization is uncomfortable. The woman Andy once rejected as a symbol of everything wrong with the fashion industry has influenced the way Andy understands ambition, discipline, and leadership. This doesn't mean Andy suddenly approves of everything Miranda did. It means she has developed enough maturity to recognize complexity. The final act therefore focuses less on defeating an enemy and more on making choices. Miranda must decide whether she is willing to change. Andy must decide whether she is willing to help someone whose methods she once rejected. Emily and Nigel must decide how much of the old-fashioned world is worth protecting. The ending is ultimately about evolution. Miranda does not become a completely different person. Andy does not become Miranda. Emily does not abandon the fashion world. Instead, the characters find ways to move forward without completely rejecting their pasts. This is especially important for Andy. Years later, Andy can look at Miranda's world and appreciate certain aspects of it without allowing it to control her. That is the biggest difference between the young Andy and the older Andy. She no longer needs to define herself in opposition to Miranda. She can simply be herself. The ending also provides emotional closure for Miranda. She remains intimidating, demanding, and extraordinarily confident, but she has learned that power cannot remain static. The fashion industry has changed, and she must change with it. Rather than surrendering, she adapts on her own terms. That is perhaps the most Miranda-like ending possible. She doesn't become softer. She becomes smarter about where to use her power. Emily also gets a satisfying evolution. She has transformed from a desperate assistant into a woman with authority of her own. Her success demonstrates that surviving Miranda's world was not simply a traumatic experience. It also gave her skills, knowledge, and ambition that helped shape her career. Nigel similarly remains an important symbol of the creative side of fashion. He reminds the characters that behind all the corporate battles, fashion is still ultimately about creativity. The sequel's final message is therefore broader than fashion is changing. It is about learning how to change without losing yourself. That idea connects all the major characters. Miranda must adapt to a new industry. Andy must redefine success. Emily must embrace her own authority. Nigel must navigate a fashion world that is increasingly commercialized. Their stories intersect because they all belong to different stages of the same transformation. The film also works as a commentary on nostalgia. Audiences remember the original The Devil Wears Prada as a snapshot of the mid-2000s fashion and media world. The sequel acknowledges that nostalgia but refuses to live entirely inside it. It brings back familiar characters, locations, attitudes, and relationships, but places them in a very different cultural environment. That is why the sequel's plot is not simply a repeat of the first movie. Andy isn't the assistant anymore. Miranda isn't operating in the same industry. Emily isn't trying to impress Miranda. Nigel isn't simply waiting for his next opportunity. Everyone has moved forward, and that is ultimately what makes the story work. The Devil Wears Prada 2 is not really about returning to the past. It is about discovering what happens after the past. The first movie asked whether Andy could survive Miranda's world without losing herself. The sequel asks a more mature question. After surviving that world and building a life of her own, what happens when she encounters it again? The answer is that Andy is no longer afraid of Miranda. She can respect her without worshiping her. She can challenge her without hating her. She can learn from her without becoming her. And Miranda, perhaps for the first time, can look at Andy and recognize a professional equal. That transformation gives the sequel its emotional foundation. In the end, the fashion world remains glamorous, competitive, and ruthless, but the characters are no longer the same people who entered it years earlier. Andy has grown into her own identity. Emily has become a powerful figure in her own right. Nigel continues to represent the creativity and craftsmanship behind fashion. And Miranda remains Miranda, but now understands that even someone as powerful as her cannot stop the world from changing. The final message is therefore simple but meaningful. Success is not about staying exactly the same forever. It is about knowing when to adapt, what to preserve, and, most importantly, who you want to be when the spotlight finally moves somewhere else. The Devil Wears Prada 2, 2026 cast, and their work. The Devil Wears Prada 2 brings back the four actors who made the original 2006 film so memorable. Meryl Streep as Miranda Priestley, Anne Hathaway as Andy Sachs, Emily Blunt as Emily Charlton, and Stanley Tucci as Nigel Kipling. Almost 20 years after the first movie, the sequel places these characters in a very different professional and personal world. The returning actors are joined by a strong ensemble that includes Kenneth Branagh, Simone Ashley, Justin Theroux, Lucy Liu, Patrick Bramall, Caleb Heron, Helen J. Shun, Pauline Chalamet, B.J. Novak, Conrad Ricamora, Tracy Toms, and Tibor Feldman. The film was directed by David Frankel, with Aline Brosh McKenna returning as writer. Meryl Streep as Miranda Priestley. Meryl Streep once again plays Miranda Priestley, the legendary editor-in-chief of Runway magazine. Miranda remains the central figure around whom much of the fashion world revolves, but the sequel shows her at a very different point in her career. Almost 2 decades have passed since Andy first entered her office, and the media landscape has changed dramatically. Streep's performance is important because Miranda cannot simply be played exactly as she was in the first film. The character is still intimidating, controlled, and incredibly demanding, but there is now an additional layer of vulnerability beneath that authority. Miranda has spent years building her reputation, and the sequel places her in a situation where the traditional fashion media system is no longer as secure as it once was. Streep's greatest strength in the role continues to be her ability to communicate enormous amounts of information with extremely small reactions. Miranda does not need to shout to dominate a room. A look, pause, or slight change in expression can communicate disappointment, approval, or irritation. In the sequel, this becomes even more effective because Miranda is surrounded by people who know her history. Andy is no longer frightened by her in the same way, while Emily has become powerful herself. Streep therefore has to portray Miranda as someone who remains dominant while gradually recognizing that the people around her have changed. Her performance gives the sequel its connection to the original film, while also allowing Miranda to feel like a believable older version of the same character. Anne Hathaway as Andy Sachs. and Hathaway returns as Andy Sachs. But the Andy we see in 2026 is very different from the young woman who entered Runway in the original movie. In the first film, Andy was an inexperienced journalist who knew almost nothing about fashion. She initially saw Runway as a strange and superficial world. Over time, she learned how powerful the industry could be, but she eventually realized that she did not want to lose herself in the process. Hathaway's performance therefore depends on maturity, rather than the awkwardness that defines some of Andy's best moments in the original. There is still humor in the character, but it comes from a more experienced Andy observing the absurdity of the fashion world. Her relationship with Miranda is also much more complicated now. Andy doesn't necessarily forgive everything Miranda did, but she has gained enough perspective to recognize that Miranda taught her important lessons about ambition, discipline, and professional standards. Hathaway's work is especially effective when Andy has to decide whether returning to Miranda's world means returning to the person she used to be. The answer is no. Andy can enter that world again without becoming the same inexperienced assistant. Emily Blunt as Emily Charlton. Emily Blunt's return as Emily Charlton is one of the most anticipated aspects of the sequel. In the original movie, Emily was Miranda's senior assistant and one of the most ambitious people at Runway. She was obsessed with fashion, desperate to succeed, and initially extremely skeptical of Andy. Her transformation in the sequel is significant. Emily has moved far beyond being an assistant. She has established herself as a powerful figure in the luxury fashion business. This means that the power relationship between Emily and Miranda has changed dramatically. Blunt has talked about the appeal of exploring how Emily handles having genuine power rather than simply believing she has power. That distinction is important to the character. The Emily of the original movie had authority mainly because she worked close to Miranda. The older Emily has built authority of her own. This gives Blunt the opportunity to play Emily with greater confidence. Emily is still sharp, ambitious, and stylish, but she is no longer desperately seeking validation. Her relationship with Andy has also matured. Their friendship remains complicated, but there is now a sense that both women understand what they went through at Runway. Blunt's performance therefore combines comedy with a more mature interpretation of Emily's ambition. She demonstrates that surviving Miranda's world did not destroy Emily. In some ways, it helped prepare her for becoming a powerful professional herself. Stanley Tucci as Nigel Kipling. Stanley Tucci returns as Nigel Kipling, one of the most beloved characters from the original movie. Nigel was Runway's art director and became one of Andy's most important allies. He introduced her to the fashion world and helped her understand why clothing mattered to the people working around her. In the sequel, Nigel remains deeply connected to Runway and Miranda. Tucci's performance is once again built around charm, intelligence, and understated humor. Nigel understands fashion better than almost anyone, but he is also realistic about the business. His loyalty to Miranda and Runway is not blind. He understands their strengths and weaknesses. After nearly 20 years, Tucci brings a sense of history to Nigel. The character feels like someone who has lived through the changing fashion industry rather than someone frozen in 2006. Tucci has described his return as a pleasure and emphasized Nigel's devotion to Miranda, Runway, and quality. That devotion remains an important part of the character. Nigel also represents the creative side of fashion. While many characters are concerned with money, corporate strategy, and influence, Nigel continues to care deeply about design, presentation, and artistic quality. Kenneth Branagh as Stewart. Kenneth Branagh joins the sequel as Stewart, adding another major dramatic presence to the cast. Branagh is particularly effective in roles requiring authority and sophistication, which makes him a natural fit for the world of The Devil Wears Prada. His character introduces another dimension to Miranda's professional and personal life. Branagh's performance helps expand the world beyond Runway itself. The sequel isn't simply about the magazine's internal office politics. It is also about the corporate and personal forces surrounding Miranda. His presence gives the movie a more mature atmosphere and helps emphasize that Miranda's problems are no longer the problems of a young assistant trying to survive her first job. Simone Ashley as Amani. Simone Ashley joins the cast as Amani, one of the new characters introduced into the Runway universe. Ashley brings a contemporary energy to the film, which is important because the sequel deliberately contrasts the old-fashioned media establishment with newer generations. Her presence helps communicate that the fashion world has changed. Unlike the first movie, where Andy represented the inexperienced newcomer, the sequel has several younger characters who are already familiar with digital culture, changing fashion trends, and new forms of influence. Ashley therefore contributes to the generational dimension of the story. Justin Theroux as Benji Barnes. Justin Theroux plays Benji Barnes. Theroux is an actor known for combining dramatic intensity with humor, making him a good fit for the sequel's mixture of personal relationships and professional conflict. Benji is connected to the newer side of Andy's life and helps demonstrate how much her world has changed since the first film. The character is part of the broader story surrounding Andy's professional and personal development. Theroux's presence also adds another recognizable personality to an already star-heavy ensemble. Lucy Liu as Sasha Barnes. Lucy Liu plays Sasha Barnes, another new character. Liu brings considerable experience in both comedy and drama, allowing her to fit naturally into the sophisticated world of the movie. Her character is connected to Benji and contributes to the expanded network of relationships surrounding the returning characters. The inclusion of actors such as Liu demonstrates how the sequel is designed to create a larger world rather than simply recreate the original office environment. Patrick Bramall as Peter. Patrick Bramall plays Peter. His role is part of the new generation of characters introduced into the Runway story. Bramall's experience with comedy is particularly useful because The Devil Wears Prada 2 remains a comedy drama rather than becoming a purely serious examination of the fashion industry. The new supporting characters provide opportunities for humor while also helping establish the professional environment that exists around Andy and Miranda. Caleb Heron as Charlie. Caleb Heron appears as Charlie. Helen J. Shun plays Jean, another member of the new ensemble. Her character contributes to the modern runway environment and helps make the sequel feel like a continuation rather than a simple reunion special. The new employees and professionals represent the changing fashion industry that Miranda must navigate. Their presence allows the movie to compare the culture of runway in the mid-2000s with the culture of the modern fashion business. BJ Novak as Jay Ravitas. BJ Novak appears as Jay Ravitas. Novak is particularly recognizable for his work in comedy and television, so his presence adds another layer of humor to the ensemble. His character belongs to the professional world surrounding the central runway conflict. Novak's participation also reinforces one of the sequel's strengths. It combines major dramatic actors with performers known for comedy. That balance is necessary because the movie still wants to be entertaining and witty even when dealing with serious professional stakes. Conrad Ricamora. Conrad Ricamora is also part of the new cast. Ricamora has built a reputation across television, theater, and film, giving him the kind of performance background that suits a movie where fashion and theatrical presentation are so important. His role expands the supporting world of the sequel and helps create a larger network around the central characters. Tracy Toms as Lily. Tracy Toms returns as Lily, continuing her role from the original movie. Her return is particularly valuable because it provides a direct connection to the earlier film. Rather than bringing back only the four biggest stars, the sequel also remembers characters who occupied smaller but meaningful positions in the original story. Toms therefore helps maintain continuity. Her character is part of the familiar world that Andy left behind years earlier. Tibor Feldman as Irv Ravitz. Tibor Feldman also returns as Irv Ravitz. Irv was associated with the business side of Runway in the first film, and his return gives the sequel another link to the original Runway structure. Feldman's presence is especially useful because the new story deals heavily with the changing business environment surrounding the magazine. His character represents the institutional side of the fashion world. The importance of the returning ensemble. The biggest strength of the cast is not simply that famous actors have returned. It is that the returning performers bring nearly 20 years of implied history to their characters. Meryl Streep and Anne Hathaway can communicate the history between Miranda and Andy without needing to explain everything. Emily Blunt and Anne Hathaway have a similar advantage. Their characters once occupied a very different relationship, but now both women have grown professionally. Stanley Tucci provides the emotional continuity that connects the entire runway world. Together, the four returning actors make the sequel feel connected to the original while allowing the characters to evolve. The new cast and the changing fashion world. The new performers serve another important purpose. They represent the changing fashion and media environment. The original movie was released in 2006, when print magazines still held enormous cultural influence. The sequel exists in an era of social media, digital journalism, influencers, luxury conglomerates, and online fashion culture. The new characters therefore help demonstrate that Miranda's world is no longer controlled by exactly the same people. This creates a generational conflict that wasn't necessary in the original film. Why the cast works. The casting of The Devil Wears Prada 2 works because the film doesn't depend entirely on nostalgia. If the movie had brought back only Miranda, Andy, Emily, and Nigel, it could have felt like a reunion. Instead, the new characters create a modern professional environment. The returning actors provide familiarity. The new actors provide change. That combination mirrors the central theme of the story. The world is changing, but the old characters still have something valuable to contribute. Final assessment of the performances. Meryl Streep remains the commanding center of the film as Miranda Priestley. Her performance works because she doesn't simply repeat the character from 2006. She shows Miranda as an older, more experienced professional confronting a world that no longer follows all of her old rules. And Hathaway gives Andy a much more mature identity. Her performance demonstrates that Andy has grown without losing the qualities that made audiences care about her in the first place. Emily Blunt arguably gets one of the most interesting character evolutions. Emily has transformed from Miranda's ambitious assistant into a powerful professional, and Blunt gets to explore what happens when someone who once desperately wanted power finally possesses it. Stanley Tucci remains the emotional glue of the runway world. Nigel's intelligence, humor, and devotion to quality make him one of the film's most naturally enjoyable characters. The supporting cast then expands that foundation. Kenneth Branagh, Simone Ashley, Justin Theroux, Lucy Liu, Patrick Bramall, Caleb Heron, Helen J. Shun, Pauline Chalamet, BJ Novak, and Conrad Ricamora bring new personalities into the story, while Tracy Toms and Tibor Feldman provide additional connections to the original film. The official cast information confirms these returning and new performers. Ultimately, the performances in The Devil Wears Prada 2 work because the movie understands that the audience isn't simply returning to see the same characters wearing fashionable clothes. They are returning to see what happened to these people after almost 20 years. The visual effects work therefore exists largely in the background. Instead of creating enormous digital worlds, the VFX team can be expected to concentrate on invisible effects, compositing, cleanup, digital set enhancement, title work, beauty retouching, background manipulation, and other techniques designed to make the final images look polished and believable. This distinction is important when discussing CGI in the movie. A film can contain substantial digital work without looking like a CGI-heavy production. In fact, The Devil Wears Prada 2 is the kind of film where successful VFX should ideally go unnoticed. The audience is supposed to focus on Miranda Priestley's expression, Andy Sachs's reaction, Emily Charlton's clothes, the runway offices, the fashion shows, and the glamorous environments, not on the technology used to create those images. The sequel returns to the sophisticated fashion world established by the original movie while updating it for the modern media environment. That means the visual departments have a difficult job. They have to make the world look glamorous without making it artificial. The film needs to feel contemporary, luxurious, and cinematic while retaining the grounded realism that made the first movie recognizable. The role of VFX in a fashion film. In a fashion-centered movie, visual effects often perform a very different function from what audiences normally associate with CGI. There are no giant creatures or futuristic cities that need to be created from scratch. Instead, VFX can be used to polish environments, manipulate backgrounds, correct continuity problems, and make locations look more impressive. For example, imagine a scene outside a luxury fashion event. The production may have filmed the actors and immediate surroundings practically, while the VFX team later adds additional cars, crowds, lighting elements, architectural details, or distant buildings. The audience sees one complete environment. The camera doesn't reveal how much of that environment was physically present during filming. That is the essence of invisible VFX. Digital cleanup. One of the most common forms of VFX in a production like this is digital cleanup. Film sets are filled with equipment that should never appear in the finished image. Cameras, cables, microphones, tracking markers, lighting stands, and other objects can occasionally become visible. VFX artists remove these elements digitally. This may sound simple, but removing an object isn't always as easy as erasing it. The software has to reconstruct whatever was behind the object. If a cable crosses a patterned wall, for example, the artist needs to recreate the wall's pattern. If the camera moves, the reconstructed area must move naturally with the shot. The result should look as though the unwanted object was never there. Background enhancement. Background enhancement is another area where VFX can be useful. A fashion event might be filmed in a real building, but the production may want the location to appear larger or more glamorous. Instead of physically constructing an enormous venue, filmmakers can shoot the main characters in a practical environment and extend the surrounding space digitally. This technique is known as a digital set extension. It can make a room appear deeper, create larger corridors, extend a rooftop, or make a fashion event seem much more crowded than it actually was. Because the characters remain in a real environment, the final image can retain a natural appearance. The runway offices. The runway offices are among the most recognizable environments associated with the franchise. For the sequel, these spaces need to feel familiar while also reflecting the passage of time. The visual design therefore has to communicate that the world has changed. The office can retain elements associated with Miranda's authority and fashion culture, while incorporating contemporary technology, screens, and modern design elements. VFX can assist in creating or modifying digital screens and computer displays. This becomes particularly useful because modern offices contain enormous amounts of digital information. A computer monitor seen in the background might need to display specific content. Rather than filming a real web page or application, filmmakers can replace the screen image digitally. This gives the production complete control over what appears on screen. Digital screens and interface graphics. Modern movies frequently use VFX for phones, tablets, computers, and digital displays. The Devil Wears Prada 2 is especially likely to benefit from this because the sequel deals with a modern media environment. Characters may communicate through smartphones. News may appear on digital screens. Social media content may be visible in the background. Fashion publications may appear on tablets or computers. These elements can be added or replaced during post-production. This also helps protect actors' privacy and avoids problems associated with filming real websites or messages. A digital interface can be designed specifically for the movie. Social media and modern fashion. The sequel takes place in an era when fashion influence is no longer controlled entirely by magazines. That creates interesting visual possibilities. The filmmakers can use digital graphics to show social media feeds, online articles, viral fashion moments, and digital campaigns. These elements can appear briefly without requiring the audience to stop and read every detail. From a VFX perspective, these are relatively simple effects, but they play an important storytelling role. They show how the fashion industry has evolved since the first movie. The original film represented a world dominated by print magazines. The sequel can visually represent a world where influence also comes from phones, websites, online personalities, and social platforms. Fashion show effects. Fashion shows are likely to be among the most visually demanding sequences in the movie, although they still do not require the type of CGI found in blockbuster action films. A fashion show needs a huge sense of scale. There may be hundreds of people in the audience, photographers, models, lighting equipment, cameras, and large architectural spaces. Sometimes a production can capture a significant portion of this practically, but VFX can then increase the scale. Additional audience members can be digitally duplicated. Empty sections of a venue can be filled. Background photographers can be added. Lighting effects can be enhanced. The result is a fashion event that feels larger than the physical production may have been. Crowd replication. Crowd replication is a common visual effects technique. Suppose the production has 200 extras available, but the story requires the fashion show to appear to contain 1,000 people. Instead of hiring 1,000 extras, filmmakers can shoot sections of the crowd and digitally combine them. The VFX team must make sure that repeated people aren't obvious. They may alter positions, clothing colors, lighting, and movement. The final image can therefore look like a much larger crowd. This technique is especially useful for fashion events because the audience is often seen from a distance. Reflections and glass. Fashion environments frequently contain glass, mirrors, and reflective surfaces. These can create difficult VFX problems. A mirror may accidentally reveal a camera or crew member. A glass wall can reflect unwanted equipment. A reflective table may show objects that aren't supposed to be visible. VFX artists can digitally remove these elements. They can also manipulate reflections to make sure the final image remains visually clean. These are small details, but they are important in a film that places so much emphasis on luxury and visual perfection. Fashion photography. Another area where VFX can become important is the creation of fictional fashion photography. The film may require magazine covers, advertising campaigns, editorial photographs, or digital fashion images. Some of these can be photographed practically. Others may be constructed digitally using a combination of photography, graphic design, and compositing. The fictional magazine covers need to look convincing because the audience is familiar with real fashion publications. Typography, photography, layout, color, and branding all have to feel authentic. Costume and VFX. Costumes are obviously central to the movie. However, VFX can sometimes assist costume departments without replacing physical clothing. For example, a designer might create a practical costume and later use digital effects to remove wrinkles, correct small continuity problems, or modify tiny visual details. Digital compositing can also help combine multiple costume elements. But it is important to understand that this doesn't mean the film's fashion is CGI. The actual clothing worn by the actors remains an important practical component. VFX simply provides additional control during post-production. Beauty retouching. Because this is a fashion-focused production featuring actors such as Meryl Streep, Anne Hathaway, and Emily Blunt, beauty work is likely to be an important part of the finishing process. Digital beauty retouching can be used to remove temporary imperfections, maintain makeup continuity, and make sure actors look consistent across different takes. Good beauty work is subtle. If the audience notices that an actor's face has been heavily digitally altered, the effect can become distracting. The objective is usually to preserve the actor's natural appearance while ensuring that the image looks polished. Age and character continuity. Nearly 20 years have passed since the original film. That means the characters naturally look older. The sequel doesn't need to make them look 20 years younger. In fact, their age is part of the story. However, continuity between different scenes may require subtle digital adjustments. If a scene is filmed across multiple days, lighting and makeup can produce slightly different appearances. VFX can help maintain consistency. This is particularly important for close-ups, where small changes are more noticeable. Compositing. Compositing is one of the central techniques behind invisible VFX. It involves combining different visual elements into a single image. A fashion event might use footage from several cameras. A background might be filmed separately. A digital sign could be created later. Additional crowd elements might be inserted. The compositor combines these pieces and adjusts color, lighting, and perspective so they look like they belong together. When successful, the audience sees only one image: green screen and blue screen. There is no reason to assume that The Devil Wears Prada 2 depends heavily on green screen photography. Most of its environments are realistic and can be filmed practically. However, green screen or blue screen may still be useful for specific shots. For example, a car interior could be filmed separately from a moving background. A difficult exterior environment could be replaced digitally. A luxury location might be extended beyond the practical set. The technology would be used only when it provides a practical advantage. Virtual production. Virtual production is another modern filmmaking technique. but it should not automatically be assumed that the movie was extensively produced using LED walls or virtual environments. A film like this has much less need for virtual production than science fiction or fantasy projects. Real locations are often more convincing for fashion, offices, and restaurants. If virtual environments were used, they would most likely serve specific sequences rather than dominate the entire production. Color grading. Color grading is extremely important to the movie's visual identity. Although color grading isn't technically the same thing as CGI, it is part of the digital finishing process. A fashion film needs a carefully controlled color palette. Different locations can have different visual identities. The runway office might have cool, sophisticated tones. Fashion shows can use dramatic contrast and saturated colors. Personal scenes can be warmer and more natural. The colorist helps unify all of these images. Lighting enhancement. Digital effects can also be used to enhance lighting. A fashion runway may require intense flashes from photographers. Instead of relying entirely on practical lights, post-production can add or strengthen flashes. Background lights can be enhanced. Windows can be brightened. City lights can be added. These changes can make an environment appear more luxurious without fundamentally changing the location. Digital matte painting. Matte painting is another technique that can be used for establishing shots. Suppose the filmmakers want to show an impressive New York skyline or a large fashion industry headquarters. They may photograph a real location and digitally extend it. A matte painting can add distant buildings, architectural details, or environmental elements. This creates scale without requiring an enormous physical set. Again, the audience usually shouldn't be able to tell where the real environment ends and the digital environment begins. New York as a visual character. The city itself is an important part of the film's visual identity. New York is closely connected with fashion, publishing, and media. The sequel can use recognizable streets and buildings to establish authenticity. VFX can then help control traffic, remove unwanted signs, add background vehicles, or adjust the skyline. This makes the city feel polished while retaining the character of a real place. Visual effects can even contribute to comedy. A digital screen might display a humorous message. A background character might be digitally removed to improve the timing of a joke. A fashion presentation might be enhanced to exaggerate its scale. These effects don't have to be spectacular. Sometimes the smallest visual alteration can improve comedic timing. The importance of invisible VFX. The most successful effects in The Devil Wears Prada 2 are likely to be the ones that viewers never consciously recognize. This is a very different philosophy from movies where VFX are meant to impress. Here, VFX supports performance. If Miranda walks into a room, the audience should notice Miranda. If Andy looks shocked, the audience should notice Andy. If Emily enters a fashion show, the audience should notice her clothing and attitude. The visual effects should never distract from those moments. Practical effects versus CGI. The film's visual style depends heavily on practical filmmaking. Real costumes, real actors, real locations, real props, and real sets create much of the movie's authenticity. CGI then supplements those elements. This combination is generally more convincing than attempting to create everything digitally. Fashion itself is tactile. The audience needs to believe in the texture of the fabrics, the movement of dresses, and the physical presence of the characters. Practical costumes provide that authenticity. VFX can then polish the image around them. The digital transformation of runway. One of the most interesting visual differences between the first film and the sequel is likely to be the way runway's media environment looks. The original runway office was filled with magazines, photographs, printed pages, and physical editorial materials. The modern version can incorporate digital displays, phones, laptops, and social media content. This creates a visual representation of the technological transformation that has occurred during the nearly 20-year gap between the movies. The VFX team therefore has a storytelling function. Digital graphics aren't merely decoration. They demonstrate how the world around Miranda has changed. Final assessment. Ultimately, The Devil Wears Prada 2 should not be judged by the amount of CGI it contains. It is not designed to compete with a superhero blockbuster. Its visual effects strategy is much more sophisticated in a quieter way. The film uses VFX to make fashion shows larger, environments cleaner, screens more believable, backgrounds more controlled, and images more polished. Digital compositing can unite different pieces of footage. Set extensions can make locations appear larger. Crowd replication can create impressive fashion events. Digital cleanup can remove unwanted objects. Screen replacement can make modern technology believable. Beauty retouching can maintain continuity. Color grading can create the appropriate luxury aesthetic. And digital graphics can visually demonstrate the transformation of the media industry. The key is that these effects should remain almost invisible. The movie's biggest visual stars are still the actors and the clothes. Meryl Streep's Miranda needs to command attention without CGI, and Hathaway's Andy needs to communicate emotion through performance. Emily Blunt's Emily needs to show how much the character has changed. Stanley Tucci's Nigel needs to bring warmth and intelligence to the fashion world. No digital effect can replace those performances. Instead, VFX creates the environment in which those performances can work. The sequel's visual approach therefore reflects its larger story. Just as the characters are learning to adapt to a new era, the visual language of the movie combines traditional filmmaking with modern digital techniques. The original The Devil Wears Prada came from a period when fashion magazines and print journalism had enormous cultural influence. The sequel exists in a world dominated by smartphones, social platforms, digital publications, influencers, and rapidly changing fashion trends. The VFX and CGI can help make that difference visible. A screen can replace a magazine. A digital campaign can replace a traditional advertisement. A massive online audience can be represented through graphics. A fashion event can be expanded digitally. Yet the fundamental elements remain physical: clothing, people, buildings, photography, and performance. That balance is exactly what makes the visual style appropriate. The movie opened internationally from April 29, 2026, followed by its wide domestic release in the United States on May 1, 2026. Its commercial performance demonstrated that the popularity of the original film had remained extremely strong and that audiences were willing to return to these characters after almost 2 decades. The movie had a reported production budget of approximately $100 million, which made its eventual worldwide performance particularly impressive. According to the available box office figures, the film finished with approximately $692.3 million worldwide, consisting of around $220.6 million from the domestic market and approximately $471.8 million from international markets. This means that international audiences generated roughly 2/3 of the movie's worldwide theatrical revenue, while the North American market contributed about 1/3. The film therefore performed as a genuinely global hit rather than depending primarily on the American audience. The theatrical release strategy was also important. The movie began arriving in several international territories on April 29th and 30th before opening in the United States and other markets around May 1st. This gave the sequel an opportunity to build momentum internationally before its full North American opening. It also meant that social media discussion, audience reactions, and fashion-related publicity could build across several markets almost simultaneously. The United States opening was particularly strong. The Devil Wears Prada 2 earned approximately $76.7 million during its domestic opening weekend. That represented a substantial percentage of its eventual American gross and immediately established the sequel as a major theatrical attraction. The opening was especially significant because the movie is a comedy drama rather than an action-heavy franchise film. Its success demonstrated the strength of its cast, the nostalgia surrounding the original, and the continuing popularity of fashion-oriented entertainment. The domestic run eventually reached approximately $220.56 million. While the opening weekend was obviously important, the domestic run eventually reached approximately $220.56 million. While the opening weekend was obviously important, the film's ability to remain in theaters and continue earning money after the first weekend was equally significant. The movie did not simply depend on a huge initial fan turnout. It continued attracting audiences during the following weeks, suggesting that the sequel was appealing not only to people who had grown up with the original, but also to newer viewers discovering the franchise. One of the most interesting aspects of the box office performance is the international contribution. The film earned approximately $471.77 million outside the United States and Canada, making the international market responsible for approximately 68% of its global theatrical revenue. This is particularly appropriate for a movie centered on fashion because the fashion industry itself is global. Luxury brands, international fashion houses, magazines, celebrities, and designers have audiences all over the world. Several international markets performed particularly well. Germany generated more than $35 million, Brazil more than $33 million, Australia around $30 million, France close to $28 million, and Japan more than $34 million. These figures demonstrate that the sequel was not simply successful in English-speaking territories. It had significant appeal across Europe, Asia, and Latin America as well. The Brazilian performance is especially notable because the film generated more than $33 million there, making Brazil one of its strongest international territories. Germany also became a major market, with the movie earning roughly $35.6 million. Japan delivered approximately $34.7 million, showing that the franchise had substantial appeal in East Asia as well. France, a country strongly associated with fashion and luxury culture, also delivered a substantial result of around $27.9 million. The setting and subject matter of the movie naturally have strong connections with audiences interested in international fashion culture, making France an especially appropriate market for the sequel. Australia contributed roughly $30 million, while China generated around $15.4 million. The film also earned several million dollars in countries such as Argentina, Austria, Belgium, Chile, Colombia, South Korea, and Taiwan. These numbers collectively demonstrate the broad international reach of the franchise. India was a smaller market compared with the biggest international territories, but the movie still generated meaningful theatrical business. Its reported Indian gross was approximately 28.32 Indian rupees crore, according to Indian box office reporting. The film opened with roughly 5 Indian rupees crore on its first day and reached around 13 Indian rupees crore by the end of its opening weekend. Its Indian theatrical performance gradually increased before settling at its final reported total. For a Hollywood fashion comedy drama, that represents a respectable result, although the movie's strongest markets were elsewhere. The relationship between budget and revenue is another important part of the box office story. With a production budget reported at approximately $100 million and a worldwide gross of more than $692 million, the theatrical revenue was almost 7 times the production budget. This does not mean the studio literally received 7 times its investment as profit, because theatrical revenue is divided between cinemas and distributors, and marketing expenses are separate from the production budget. Nevertheless, the ratio demonstrates that the movie had an exceptionally strong commercial run. Marketing was particularly important for this sequel because nostalgia was one of its strongest selling points. The campaign could immediately remind audiences of the original movie's iconic characters, especially Miranda Priestley's legendary attitude and Andy Sachs's transformation from inexperienced journalist to confident professional. The return of the original 4 principal actors gave the sequel enormous promotional value. Meryl Streep's return as Miranda was one of the biggest attractions, and Hathaway's return as Andy was equally important because their relationship formed the emotional foundation of the original movie. Emily Blunt and Stanley Tucci also contributed to the nostalgic appeal. The marketing could therefore present the film as both a new story and a reunion with characters audiences already loved. The fashion element also became a major part of the movie's commercial identity. The Devil Wears Prada was always more than a conventional workplace comedy because clothing was effectively one of its characters. The sequel continued that tradition. Fashion, luxury brands, glamorous locations, and the runway environment became important components of the movie's promotional campaign. This helped the film appeal beyond traditional movie audiences. Fashion enthusiasts, fans of the original movie, followers of the actors, and viewers interested in celebrity culture all had reasons to watch it. Another important factor was the long gap between the 2 films. Almost 20 years had passed since the original movie. Normally, such a long delay could make a sequel difficult to sell. However, in this case, The passage of time actually became part of the marketing appeal. Audiences who watched the original in 2006 had grown older alongside the characters. Many viewers who originally saw Andy as a young journalist were now adults with careers and families of their own. The sequel, therefore, had an unusual ability to appeal to nostalgia while also presenting a more mature story. The movie's box office performance indicates that this strategy worked. After completing its theatrical run, The Devil Wears Prada 2 moved into the home entertainment market. Its digital home release began on June 30th, 2026, giving audiences the opportunity to purchase or rent the movie digitally. This was less than 2 months after its theatrical release, representing the increasingly common modern pattern of moving successful films from cinemas to premium digital platforms relatively quickly. The digital release was available through major video-on-demand services, including platforms such as Apple TV, Amazon Prime Video, and Sky Store in applicable markets. This stage of the release allowed audiences who had missed the theatrical run to watch the movie at home, while also giving fans who wanted to revisit it another option. The timing was significant because the film had already established itself as a theatrical success. Instead of waiting many months before making the movie available digitally, the studio used the momentum from the theatrical campaign to continue monetizing the title in the home market. The film was subsequently made available for subscription streaming. July 29, 2026 became the major streaming date, with the movie arriving on Disney Plus and Hulu in the relevant markets. This gave the movie a second major life after its theatrical run. The transition from cinema to digital purchase and rental, and then to subscription streaming, reflects the modern distribution model for major studio movies. Instead of relying exclusively on DVD and Blu-ray sales, studios now use multiple windows to maximize a film's commercial potential. The home media strategy also benefited from the movie's rewatchability. A fashion movie like The Devil Wears Prada 2 is particularly suitable for repeated viewing because audiences can return to it for the clothes, performances, dialogue, humor, and character relationships. Viewers who already know the story can pay more attention to costumes and production design during subsequent viewings. The streaming release also introduced the movie to people who may not have been willing to buy a theatrical ticket. Some viewers prefer to watch movies at home, particularly comedy dramas that do not necessarily require a giant cinema screen. The availability on subscription streaming therefore expanded the movie's potential audience considerably. There is also an important difference between the theatrical and home media experiences. In theaters, the film's success depended on convincing audiences that it was worth paying to see immediately. At home, the decision becomes much easier. Fans can watch it casually, revisit favorite scenes, and recommend it to friends and family. This can extend the cultural lifespan of a movie. The original The Devil Wears Prada became a long-lasting favorite partly because it remained popular after its theatrical run. Television broadcasts, DVD ownership, digital availability, and repeated viewing helped transform it from a successful 2006 movie into a cultural phenomenon. The sequel now has the opportunity to follow a similar path. The home media release is particularly important because the movie's audience includes people who may have discovered the original after its initial theatrical release. Younger viewers who were children, or not even born, when the first movie arrived can now discover both films through streaming services. That creates a new generation of viewers for the franchise. Another advantage of the digital and streaming release is international accessibility. A theatrical release requires cinemas in individual markets to dedicate screens to the film. Streaming platforms remove many of those limitations. Once a movie becomes available on a global streaming service, it can reach viewers in markets where its theatrical performance was relatively modest. This can dramatically extend a movie's international popularity. The film's home media performance is therefore not simply an additional source of revenue. It also contributes to the movie's long-term cultural relevance. The theatrical box office established The Devil Wears Prada 2 as a commercial success. Digital rental and purchase allowed the most enthusiastic fans to own or rent it. Streaming then made the movie accessible to a much broader audience. The sequence creates multiple opportunities for the movie to generate value. It is also worth remembering that box office revenue does not equal studio profit. From the roughly $692 million worldwide theatrical gross, cinemas keep a portion of ticket revenue. The percentage varies by territory and by the stage of a movie's theatrical run. The studio also has to account for marketing, distribution, production, and other costs. Even with those considerations, the performance is clearly impressive. The sequel's approximately $100 million production budget was substantial, but not comparable to the enormous budgets of many contemporary franchise blockbusters. Its nearly $700 million global theatrical performance therefore represents a strong commercial outcome. The film also benefited from the strength of its intellectual property. Unlike an original movie, the studio did not have to introduce audiences to the characters from scratch. The first film had already established Miranda, Andy, Emily, and Nigel as recognizable personalities. That familiarity reduced the marketing challenge. The audience already knew what kind of world they were entering. They wanted to know what happened to Andy. They wanted to see Miranda again. They wanted to discover what Emily became. And they wanted another look at Nigel's stylish world. The box office results suggest that those questions were strong enough to bring audiences back. In conclusion, The Devil Wears Prada 2 had a highly successful theatrical journey in 2026. With a worldwide gross of approximately $692.3 million, including about $220.6 million domestically and $471.8 million internationally, the sequel became a major global hit. Its approximately $76.7 million domestic opening weekend established strong early momentum, while its international performance demonstrated that the franchise had become a genuinely worldwide property. The movie's success was particularly impressive considering its reported $100 million production budget and the fact that it belongs to the comedy-drama genre rather than an action-driven blockbuster category. Its fashion focus, famous cast, nostalgia, and connection to the beloved original helped it attract a wide audience. The home media strategy then continued that success. The movie became available for digital purchase and rental on June 30th, 2026, followed by its Disney Plus and Hulu streaming release on July 29th, 2026. By moving through theatrical, digital, and subscription streaming windows, the movie was able to reach audiences with different viewing preferences. Ultimately, the commercial story of The Devil Wears Prada 2 is a story about the power of nostalgia combined with modern distribution. The film did not simply rely on the popularity of the 2006 original. It successfully transformed that nostalgia into a new theatrical event and then carried the audience from cinemas into the home entertainment market. This reunion is significant because Frankel directed the 2006 film and McKenna wrote its screenplay, meaning both filmmakers understand the characters, tone, humor, and fashion world satire from the inside. The sequel therefore represents not only a reunion of the cast, but also a reunion of the creative team responsible for establishing the original movie's identity. The film is officially credited to David Frankel as director and Aline Brosh McKenna as writer, with Wendy Feinerman producing. David Frankel, the director behind the sequel. David Frankel is the director responsible for bringing the world of The Devil Wears Prada back to the screen nearly 20 years after the original. His return is particularly appropriate because the first film was one of the projects that became strongly associated with his filmmaking style. Frankel's career has covered television and feature films, and he has developed a reputation for working effectively with character-driven stories, comedy, relationships, and sophisticated adult drama. Before The Devil Wears Prada, he had already demonstrated an ability to balance humor with emotional material. That combination became extremely important to the 2006 film because the story was never simply a comedy about clothes. It was also a story about ambition, identity, professional pressure, and personal relationships. For the sequel, Frankel faced a difficult challenge. Almost 20 years had passed since he first directed Miranda Priestley, Andy Sachs, Emily Charlton, and Nigel Kipling. The audience's relationship with those characters had changed, while the fashion and media industries had transformed dramatically. The director therefore needed to make a film that felt familiar without becoming a simple remake of the original. That balance is one of the most important aspects of Frankel's work on the sequel. Returning to the world of Runway. One of Frankel's biggest responsibilities was reconstructing the atmosphere of Runway magazine for a new era. The original film introduced audiences to an exaggerated but recognizable version of the fashion publishing business. The runway offices were glamorous, intimidating, and extremely fast-moving. Miranda's arrival could change the atmosphere of an entire room. In the sequel, Frankel returns to that environment, but has to show that it has evolved. Traditional print publishing is no longer as dominant as it was in 2006. Digital journalism, social media, influencers, and online advertising have changed the relationship between fashion and media. Frankel therefore had to create a world that feels connected to the original while clearly belonging to the 2020s. That is where his understanding of tone becomes important. The sequel still needs the sharp humor associated with the franchise, but it also needs to acknowledge the professional realities facing Miranda. The challenge is to make those issues entertaining rather than turning the film into a lecture about the decline of print journalism. Frankel's approach to Miranda Priestley. Meryl Streep's Miranda Priestley is the most recognizable character in the franchise, so directing her requires an understanding of how little she needs to do to dominate a scene. Frankel's direction allows Miranda's personality to remain powerful without turning every scene into a repetition of the original movie. The younger Miranda of 2006 was presented as an almost mythical fashion authority. Everyone around her was terrified of making a mistake. The older Miranda is still formidable, but her circumstances have changed. The director can therefore explore a slightly different dimension of the character. She is no longer simply the boss who controls everyone around her. She is a veteran professional trying to maintain influence in an industry undergoing enormous change. That creates an opportunity for Frankel and Streep to show Miranda as both powerful and vulnerable, directing Meryl Streep and Anne Hathaway together again. Another major challenge was reuniting Meryl Streep and Anne Hathaway. The relationship between Miranda and Andy was the emotional center of the first movie. The sequel cannot simply recreate their old employer-employee dynamic because Andy is no longer the inexperienced assistant. She has grown professionally. Frankel therefore has to direct their scenes in a way that communicates their shared history. A glance between the two characters can carry years of professional history. Andy doesn't have to be terrified of Miranda anymore. Miranda doesn't have to treat Andy like a completely inexperienced newcomer. The power relationship has changed. This gives Frankel an opportunity to make their conversations more balanced and mature. The tension is still present, but it comes from two experienced professionals who understand each other much better than they did before. Emily Blunt's evolution. Frankel also has the responsibility of showing how Emily Charlton has changed. In the original film, Emily was desperate to succeed at Runway. She was ambitious, competitive, and deeply invested in Miranda's approval. By the time of the sequel, Emily has become a powerful professional in her own right. That means Frankel cannot direct Emily as though she were still the nervous assistant from the first movie. Her confidence needs to be visible in her posture, dialogue, and interactions. The director uses the character's new position to create a fascinating contrast with Miranda. Emily once worked under Miranda. Now she has her own influence. That change demonstrates how much time has passed without requiring the film to explain every detail of the intervening years. The return of Nigel. Stanley Tucci's Nigel is another important part of Frankel's approach. Nigel was one of the warmest and most human characters in the original movie. He understood the fashion world, but was not completely consumed by its politics. He also became an important mentor figure for Andy. In the sequel, Nigel provides continuity. Frankel can use him as a bridge between the old Runway and its new incarnation. Nigel understands the traditions of the fashion business, but also recognizes that the industry has changed. That makes him particularly valuable in a story about transformation. Comedy and drama. One of Frankel's greatest challenges is maintaining the balance between comedy and drama. The Devil Wears Prada is funny, but it isn't purely a comedy. The characters deal with serious questions about careers, relationships, ambition, and identity. The sequel follows a similar approach. The fashion industry provides plenty of opportunities for humor, especially through Miranda's personality and the absurdity of elite fashion culture. At the same time, the professional crisis facing Miranda gives the story genuine stakes. Frankel's experience with both comedy and drama allows these elements to coexist. The audience can laugh at a scene and then immediately understand why the underlying situation matters. That tonal balance is one of the defining characteristics of the franchise. Aline Brosh McKenna, the writer, returns. Aline Brosh McKenna is arguably even more important to the sequel's identity than the director, because she returns as the screenwriter after writing the original film. The first The Devil Wears Prada became famous for its dialogue. Miranda's lines were sharp and memorable. Andy and Emily had distinct voices. Nigel provided humor and insight. The screenplay transformed Lauren Weisberger's novel into a movie that worked independently of the book. McKenna's return, therefore, gives the sequel a direct connection to the original screenplay. She understands the rhythm of the characters' conversations and knows how to write fashion world dialogue that is sophisticated without becoming inaccessible. Writing a sequel nearly 20 years later. Writing a sequel after almost 2 decades is extremely difficult. The writer has to answer an obvious question. Why does this story need to exist now? McKenna's solution is to make the passage of time itself part of the story. The world of publishing has changed. Miranda has aged. Andy has developed her career. Emily has become successful. The characters cannot simply return to the same positions they occupied in 2006. Their new circumstances create the story. This is one of the most intelligent choices in the screenplay. Instead of pretending that nothing has changed, McKenna uses change as the central dramatic force. The decline of traditional publishing. One of the screenplay's major themes is the changing media industry. The original movie was created during a period when fashion magazines had tremendous cultural power. Today, traditional magazines face competition from digital publications, social media, and online advertising. McKenna uses this transformation as the foundation for Miranda's professional conflict. According to McKenna's discussion of the sequel, the story grew from thinking about how much the world had changed since the first film, including changes in culture and economics. That is important because it means the sequel isn't simply a nostalgic continuation. It is responding to the real-world transformation of the industry. Miranda's evolution as a character. McKenna also has the responsibility of writing Miranda as an older character without destroying what made her iconic. Miranda still needs to be Miranda. She needs her confidence, intelligence, authority, and cutting humor. But she also needs new dimensions. The screenplay gives her professional vulnerability. For perhaps the first time, Miranda is in a position where her traditional authority may not be enough. She has to negotiate with people who don't automatically respect the power of a fashion editor. That creates a new type of conflict. In the first movie, Miranda controlled the environment. In the sequel, Miranda has to negotiate with an environment that is changing around her. Andy's development. McKenna also has to solve another major writing challenge: Andy. The first film story depended heavily on Andy's transformation. She entered Runway as someone who didn't understand fashion and left as someone who understood both the industry and herself. The sequel cannot repeat that arc. Instead, Andy is already experienced. Her conflict is more mature. She has to decide what kind of success she wants and what compromises she is willing to make. That allows McKenna to write Andy as an adult rather than as a young woman discovering the professional world for the first time. Emily's new position. Emily's development is another important piece of the screenplay. McKenna doesn't simply bring her back to make sarcastic comments. Emily's new professional power creates an entirely different relationship with Miranda. This reversal is clever because it allows the sequel to revisit the old power structure from another angle. Emily once wanted Miranda's approval. Now Miranda needs something from Emily's professional world. That creates an entirely new source of tension. The importance of dialogue. Dialogue remains one of McKenna's most important tools. The first movie became famous partly because characters rarely explained themselves in conventional ways. Miranda's personality came through short comments and reactions. Nigel could explain fashion without making the dialogue feel like a lecture. Andy could react as the audience's representative. The sequel continues that tradition. Good dialogue in this world needs to be fast, stylish, and intelligent. It also needs to communicate professional information without slowing the story. McKenna's familiarity with the characters makes that possible. Humor in the screenplay. The humor is another major part of McKenna's work. The fashion industry naturally provides comic material because of its exaggerated standards and unusual personalities. But the best jokes come from character. Miranda's humor comes from her complete confidence. Emily's humor comes from her sharpness and competitiveness. Nigel's humor often comes from his intelligence and understanding of the absurdity around him. Andy can provide humor by recognizing how strange the world has become without being as cynical as Miranda. This creates different comedic voices rather than having every character make the same kind of joke. Writing the new characters, McKenna also had to expand the universe. The sequel introduces several new characters, including figures played by Kenneth Branagh, Simone Ashley, Justin Theroux, Lucy Liu, Patrick Bramall, Caleb Heron, Helen J. Shin, Pauline Chalamet, BJ Novak, and Conrad Ricamora. These characters are important because they prevent the story from becoming trapped in nostalgia. The new people represent the modern professional environment. They give Andy, Miranda, and Emily new relationships and new sources of conflict. The director and writer working together. The reunion of Frankel and McKenna is perhaps the most important creative decision behind the sequel. Director and writer need to have a shared understanding of tone. McKenna creates the characters and dialogue. Frankel translates those words into performances, camera movements, pacing, and visual atmosphere. Because they already worked together on the original movie, they have an established creative language. This familiarity can be extremely valuable. They don't have to rediscover what makes the franchise work. Instead, they can focus on how to update it, production, and the speed of the sequel. The sequel's development also happened relatively quickly once the project was seriously underway. McKenna has discussed meeting with Meryl Streep in 2024 and developing the sequel from ideas about how the world had changed. The first draft went to the actors in early 2025, and production moved rapidly afterward. This speed was partly connected to the studio moving up the release schedule. That placed additional pressure on Frankel and the post-production team. For a director returning to a beloved franchise, the challenge was therefore not only creative, it was also logistical. The film had to be completed quickly enough to meet its theatrical release date while maintaining the quality expected from such a high-profile sequel. The influence of the original. Frankel and McKenna also had to respect the original without copying it. That distinction is critical. The sequel includes recognizable characters, fashion, humor, and runway imagery. But it also has a new professional conflict. The original movie asked whether Andy could survive Miranda's world. The sequel asks what happens when the world Miranda dominated begins changing around her. That is a logical evolution. The relationship between director and writer. Frankel's directing style and McKenna's writing complement each other because both understand that character is more important than spectacle. The movie doesn't require explosions or elaborate action sequences. Its major conflicts happen through conversations, professional decisions, and personal relationships. That makes the performances extremely important. The director must give actors enough space to create memorable moments. The writer must give them dialogue worth performing. Together, they create the rhythm that makes the franchise distinctive. Final assessment of David Frankel. David Frankel's return gives the sequel continuity. He understands the visual language of the original and knows how to create a world where fashion feels glamorous without making the movie feel like a fashion advertisement. His most important task is directing the returning actors as older versions of their characters. Miranda is still powerful. Andy is more confident. Emily is now powerful herself. Nigel remains a bridge between generations. Frankel's direction allows these differences to become part of the story. Final assessment of Aline Brosh McKenna. Aline Brosh McKenna's return is arguably the most important reason the sequel can feel authentic. She created the screenplay that gave the original movie its distinctive voice, and she understands these characters better than almost anyone. Her sequel screenplay does not simply recreate the old conflict. It updates it. Traditional publishing is declining. Digital media is expanding. Fashion advertising has changed. Professional power has shifted. And the characters themselves have grown older. These changes provide McKenna with a new dramatic foundation. The importance of keeping the original creative team. Ultimately, bringing back Frankel and McKenna was a smart decision because The Devil Wears Prada is strongly defined by its tone. A different director might have emphasized spectacle. A different writer might have turned the sequel into a simple nostalgia exercise. Instead, the returning creative team understands that the franchise works because of its characters. The clothes are important, the glamorous locations are important, but the heart of the movie is the relationship between people who are ambitious, complicated, and constantly trying to decide what success means. Conclusion: David Frankel and Aline Brosh McKenna are central to the identity of The Devil Wears Prada 2. Frankel returns as director, while McKenna returns as writer, reuniting the creative partnership responsible for the 2006 original. Their greatest achievement with the sequel is recognizing that nearly 20 years cannot simply be ignored. The characters have changed, the fashion industry has changed, the media industry has changed, the audience has changed. The sequel, therefore, uses those changes as the foundation of its story. Frankel brings the visual and performance continuity necessary to make the movie feel like a genuine continuation, while McKenna provides the screenplay that allows Miranda, Andy, Emily, and Nigel to evolve naturally. At the beginning of the sequel, Miranda is still one of the most influential figures in the fashion world, but her position is no longer as secure as it once was. The media landscape has changed dramatically. Traditional fashion magazines have lost some of their power, while digital platforms, online publications, social media, and corporate ownership have become increasingly important. Miranda's authority is still enormous, but she is now operating in a world that does not automatically follow the rules that made her successful in the past. This is the central problem that drives the final act. Miranda faces the possibility that Runway's future may no longer be controlled entirely by her. Corporate interests and financial pressures are becoming increasingly important, and she needs to find a way to protect her position without compromising the identity of the publication she built. The ending, therefore, isn't simply about saving a magazine. It is about Miranda deciding what she is willing to sacrifice to preserve the world she created. Miranda's final crisis. As the story approaches its conclusion, Miranda realizes that she cannot solve her problem using the same method she used 20 years earlier. In the original movie, Miranda had almost absolute authority over the people around her. Assistants competed for her approval, designers feared disappointing her, and executives recognized her influence. But the new world operates differently. Money, corporate strategy, and digital influence have changed the balance of power. Miranda's reputation still matters, but reputation alone cannot guarantee survival. This forces her to confront a truth that she has spent much of her career avoiding. Even someone as powerful as Miranda cannot stop the world from changing. The ending works because Miranda doesn't suddenly become a completely different person. She doesn't transform into a soft, sentimental character. She remains demanding, intelligent, and calculating. What changes is her willingness to accept that survival requires adaptation. Andy's role in the ending. Andy becomes extremely important during this final